Welcome to the Ernie Chambers Show.
Brothers and sisters, friends, enemies, and neutrals, you are seeing a lot on television and around the city something called the blue dot. And that means that there is one district, one representative district or congressional district in Nebraska where Democrats are able to send an electoral vote to the president, who will be Kamala Harris, in my opinion. But sometimes people don't know where the blue dot came from. So I'm going to, not being self-centered, but in a way I am, I'm going to read a couple of items. This is from a national publication called The American Prospect. It was written November 6th, 2020. Headline, "The Black Nebraska Lawmaker Who May Have Delivered the Presidency to Joe Biden." As unlikely as it may seem, Nebraska may have clinched Joe Biden's presidential victory and steered the country away from electoral college gridlock. Nebraska, like Maine, has a unique electoral system wherein, these pages are thick, the votes are split up according to congressional districts. There are 5 electoral votes in Nebraska. A state has the number of electoral votes that equal the 2 senators that every state has, and then the number of representatives. And they are determined by population. That's why the most populous states have more electoral votes and more congresspersons, because those things are determined by population. Anyway, historically, Nebraska is a deep red state with reliable blue enclaves in Omaha and Lincoln. Those are the state's 2 main urban centers. But as of Wednesday morning, Biden had won the Nebraska's 2nd congressional district by more than 6 percentage points. If Biden falls short in the states where he's trailing right now, but holds on to Nevada and Arizona, he will have 270 electoral votes in his corner, the bare minimum required to win the presidency. That would mean that the single electoral vote in Nebraska's 2nd district would provide the margin of victory, avoiding a 269 to 269 tie that would throw the election to the House of Representatives, where, because of the peculiar rules for resolving such ties, Trump would likely be chosen president, even though the House is in the hands of the Democrats. It's only the 2nd time Nebraska's electoral vote districts haven't gone fully to the statewide popular vote winner in 2008, Barack Obama poached the 2nd congressional district, which encompasses Omaha, surrounding suburbs, and a few farms, by 3,325 votes, a margin of just 1.2 percentage. In 2016, Donald Trump carried the same by 25 points, but only ousted Clinton in the District 2 by 2%. Even this year, while Biden took Nebraska's 2nd district comfortably, the same votes advanced Representative Don Bacon, the Republican incumbent, over the progressive Kara Eastman. Some of this might be confusing. Nebraskans are pretty independent, said Paul Hamill, who reports on Nebraska politics for the Omaha World Herald. There's a fair number of both Democrats and Republicans who just vote for the right person. It isn't a straight R and D vote. Though there was a coming together of forces that led to Biden's victory in the district, it would be a mistake to overlook one of its homegrown heroes, Ernie Chambers. This is a national publication. A giant in Nebraska politics, Chambers is Nebraska's longest-serving state senator, and just this year completed what could be his final term in office after 46 years of service. Immediately recognizable by his casual dress of short-sleeved sweatshirts and blue jeans, Chambers is so popular in his district that he didn't even have to campaign and was still re-elected 11 times. In this year's election, I am running as a write-in candidate. What you will see on the ballot when you come to the 11th Legislative District, if you want to vote for me, the name of the person who is on the ballot, because I had withdrawn for my own reasons from the primary and took my name off the ballot. There will be a line blank with a box next to it. You would write in Ernie Chambers and put a mark in that box. So remember, if you want to vote for me, you have to look for the 11th Legislative District. You have to, on that line, below the name of the one who's on the ballot, write in Ernie Chambers and check the box next to my name. But to continue, a self-proclaimed defender of the downtrodden, Chambers got his political start as a civil rights leader in the 1960s, and throughout his remarkable legislative career, he has fostered progressive politics in a deep red state and fought for the integrity of equal and fair representation. That includes the system for distributing electoral votes, which Chambers went to extraordinary lengths to maintain. In other words, I saved the blue dot. Nebraska established its policy of splitting electoral votes, winner-take-all system, in 1991. Winner-take-all meant that whichever candidate for president got the most votes statewide, that person got all 5 of the electoral votes, no matter how the votes broke down in each congressional district within Nebraska. When we put in place the voting by districts, not strictly speaking, but where each of the 5 districts could send an electoral vote to the overall winner, it made it possible for Douglas County, since they voted mostly for Biden, to have their one electoral vote not go to Trump, but to Joe Biden. And I hope that kind of clarifies a little bit. But anyway, let me get back to where I was. Since that time, Republicans have tried repeatedly to change this policy, especially after Obama carried the district in 2008. They came close in 2016 when Senator Bo McCoy introduced a bill to restore a winner-take-all system. McCoy was an outright racist, Chambers told me, the writer of this article, in a phone conversation. He wanted to ensure that wouldn't happen again. In other words, that the people in the 2nd Legislative District would be able to give a vote to whomever they pleased, and whoever won statewide would not necessarily get that vote of the district. Chambers countered the winner-take-all proposal by filing an amendment to McCoy's bill to instead introduce a district-take-all plan, which would have split up Nebraska into 5 presidential electoral districts and have the winner of each issue one electoral vote, eliminating any award to the statewide winner. There should be an opportunity for all citizens to cast a vote in presidential elections that would be more than merely a form, said Chambers at the time. Proponents of splitting the vote argue such a policy aligns well with Nebraska's independent political ethos as embodied by its unique unicameral legislature, a nonpartisan governing body modeled after the British Parliament. Remember, this is written by a national person in a national art publication, so he explains things about Nebraska. From Chambers, When the bill came up for debate, I began offering many amendments and motions. I also added the caveat that other bills would suffer if this one moved. In the end, Chambers, a master filibusterer on par with Mitch McConnell in the Senate, held the bill one vote shy of moving forward to a final vote. Republicans abandoned the measure, and the single and perhaps decisive electoral vote passing to Biden is the result 4 years later. Quote, "He stands up when there are inequities in the legislature," said State Senator Tony Vargas. You see that name on television now. He's running against Don Crisp Bacon, and he should win if people vote intelligently. But anyway, said State Senator Tony Vargas, who was reelected for a second term representing Omaha's South District, and described Chambers as an unsung hero of the integrity of the Nebraska Legislature. Hamill echoed these comments when he told me Chambers' greatest accomplishment as a state senator was passing district voting in a different context. Before Chambers, all the city council members in Omaha were elected at large. With a white majority, they were all white. The same was true for the school board and county board. Chambers changed all this, and now you have diversity and representation. Some people after all this time don't realize that I got the legislation that required district elections for the school board, the city council, and the county board. So when people ask what did I ever do in the legislature, it means they didn't even read the newspaper. A gifted orator, some have likened to a firebrand preacher, Chambers used his time in extended debates to educate his mostly white colleagues. Sharp-tongued, unapologetic, and bullish for justice, Chambers, who is black, was a stand-alone figure in Nebraska's overwhelmingly white and conservative legislature. Quote, "Unlike a lot of legislators, he would slash and burn," said Hamill. He didn't care who was upset or would be alienated. A polarizing figure, supporters admired Chambers for his unflagging embrace of the downtrodden, and his enemies loathed him for his obstructionist powers. From the podium, Chambers was known to quote Popeye, "I am what I am." Though first elected to office in 1970, Chambers emerged as a community leader amid racial uprisings in Omaha in the 1960s, and it was as civil rights leaders around the nation agitated for equal rights. At that time, a young barber, Chambers was nevertheless instrumental, and some people around now don't know this. Chambers was instrumental in negotiating a peace deal between black youth, police, and the Omaha City Council, which was crucial to his political beginnings. At the end of May, not long after George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, a clip of Chambers the barber, taken from the award-winning documentary A Time for Burning, went viral amid national protests against police brutality. See, I don't use the computer, so I wasn't aware of what was out there, and I couldn't figure why all these people from media were calling me from around the country and other people. Well, they had seen this clip of A Time for Burning. It was a documentary commissioned by the Lutheran Church, the national body, because a young white minister from Minneapolis named Bill Youngdahl became the pastor. His family members had been in politics, one a senator, one a governor, I think. But at any rate, he hit upon a stratagem when he saw how tightly segregated Omaha was. At that time, Augustana, which is now in what is known as the North Side Ghetto, was all white. On 24th and Lake, there's still a huge church building, but it no longer is a church. It's shut down. and I can't even remember the name of it for sure, but it was a Methodist church. So what was agreed on is that the young people would visit each other's church on Sunday mornings. Well, the white congregation was outraged. On Sunday morning, that young black children would come to that church where they claimed to believe in Christ, who died and shed his blood in order that all people, regardless of race, creed, color, could partake of the salvation that he was offering. But these white Christians at Augustana did not want to go for it, and they were very offended when the black children came to Sunday morning service. So Young Dahl was stunned by this, because in Minneapolis, which is far from a mecca for black people, was much farther advanced along the line than Omaha. So he decided not to have people visit the church. What they would do is find people in Augustana and people at the Black Methodist Church on 24th and Wirt visit each other in their homes, not church, in their homes. And this split the white church down the middle. During all of that, Young Dahl was contacted by this filming crew, and they wanted to follow him around and see what he did in the community. And in trying to figure out a black person they could talk to, they went to the mayor, and they asked, did he know of any single black person who embodied what black people in the so-called Black Revolution are about and can articulate those things? And the then mayor, whose name was Sorensen, said, and this is what the filmmakers told me, there's a young black barber in North Omaha. His name is Ernie Chambers, and he will curl your hair. And they said when they heard that from a white, obviously conservative, which is a way of saying racist mayor, that was the person they wanted to talk to, especially when he was a barber and he was young. So they came in with their cameras, and we had a conversation. By we, I mean the white preacher and me. And it was filmed. I'm not going to rehash all that, but that film was sold in these stores that sell documentaries, you know, the little discs. And it was nominated for an Academy Award. It came in second. And I didn't mind that, because the winner was one called Anderson's Platoon, about a black sergeant in Vietnam. But that disc sold like hotcakes. Well, when George Floyd was murdered on camera in Minneapolis, a clip of me having that discussion with this white minister was put on the internet, which I don't have. I didn't see it on the internet, but I wondered why people were calling me. The report was that it spread like wildfire, and I have a packet of other things that were put on the internet after people found out that I saved the blue dot position in Nebraska, and some mention the film A Time for Burning. I've done things that people in this state, in this town, don't know anything about, and people have the nerve or the ignorance to ask me, what have you ever done? And when they ask me that question, my feeling is that they are so basic in their development that I didn't want to overburden their brain, because some of them were not overburdened with brains. I would just say, well, nothing. But anyway, that was how that film, A Time for Burning, was given a rebirth when George Floyd was murdered on camera. I'm going to read this paragraph again because I want people to be aware of what I was doing as a young person. And I was also visiting the police department when anybody got arrested late at night. The families would call me, and I would go down to the police station in the middle of the night to inquire. And once they knew that I knew about the situation, it saved a lot of black men from being beaten. That was a common practice in Omaha. They called their clubs in beaters. And I've mentioned this before, but in this context, I want to say it again. When I went to work at the post office, I would still go down to the police station late at night when somebody's family told me that a member had been arrested, or people in a group saw that somebody was arrested. Now, all of them could have gone, but people are fearful, and it's something I've always understood. Didn't approve of it, but people cannot be what they're not. Water cannot rise above its level, so I would go. And this lady who sat beside me when we were sorting mail, she said, "Ernie, did you ever see the Godfather movie?" I said, "No." She said, "Well, you need to either see it or talk to somebody who saw it and ask them about Sonny." I laughed. I said, "Sonny?" I said, "Who is that?" He said, "Well, just if anybody has seen it." So somebody was talking to somebody else, and the Godfather was mentioned. I asked, had they seen the movie? They said yes. I said, "Was there a character called Sonny?" "Yeah." "Well, who was he?" "He was the son of one of the big mobsters." I said, "Well, what is significant about him that would make somebody bring him up telling me about the movie?" This person said that Sonny was very protective of his sister. Very late one night, he got a call and was told that a rival mob had her captive, and he knew where they were. So if Sonny would come, he would give him the details, and Sonny could do whatever he wanted to do without taking thought for his own safety or anything else. Sonny got in his car and headed for the rendezvous place. Well, in order to get there, he had to go across a toll bridge, so when he stopped at the toll booth to pay, you might anticipate, even if you haven't heard me tell it before, he was gunned down. It was set up to ambush him. And this woman said, "Ernie, that's what's going to happen to you." These people know how you will operate if a black person is in need. And it didn't stop me, but I have to be honest. It was on my mind. Is this real or is it a hoax? But I would go down there anyway. And the fact that I'm still here and 87 years old, obviously I was not ambushed, but I got a lot of threats in my life, written, notes stuck on my door in the legislature, telephone calls, but none of that stopped me. A statement we used to always make in the barbershop was, you got to die someday and you got to die of something. But at any rate, that time for burning was something that took place when I was young during those days also. Continuing. Though Chambers is deserving of national attention, he's most often received it for publicity. This guy said stunts and radical statements like, "My ISIS is the police." But on the legislative floor, he is a skilled tactician with a strong command of legislative rules. Quote, "He was so good with the rules, he could tie up somebody's bill and force them to make a deal," Hamill told me. And this Paul Hamill was a reporter for the Omaha World-Herald. Ever in the minority, Chambers became highly skilled in the filibuster, deploying delay tactics such as extending debate. Quote, "He fully understands one individual could really slow down and hinder movement in a state like ours," unquote, said Senator Vargas. "He doesn't do it all the time, but he does it when he believes the integrity of our state and our people might be harmed," unquote. A gifted orator, some have likened to a firebrand preacher, Chambers used his time to extend debates, to educate his mostly white colleagues on history, highlighting slavery and long-standing injustices to the black community. Now, I'm not the only black person who's ever been a senator. I've been away 4 years. Which one of any of those have been noted for educating the white people on the history that impacted on us and about slavery? I would say you should not have a George Washington birthday celebrated in Nebraska because he was one of the biggest slaveholders in history. In fact, he had so many slaves which he never freed, the father of his country and the father of all people named Washington. Find me a white Washington and you'll see how rare it is to find one who is white. He had so many slaves that when the racist slaveholders in the South rebelled in what was called the Civil War, and people down south called it the war between the states, the slaveholders took George Washington as their patron saint because he was one of them and had more slaves than any single person had during the time of the Confederacy. And our children were made to honor him because they didn't know any better. We don't know any better. And here's what some people call a stunt, the kind of thing I would do. I'd say the flag is a rag. It means nothing to me except a sign of oppression. Whenever the night riders came to lynch a black person, they carried the American flag, the one who wrote what they call their national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. The words to it were written by Francis Scott Key after a battle by the good white people against the bad white people of the South. So he wrote, "Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light, how so proudly we hail," but anyway, it's talking about the flag. And he ended it, "It will forever wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave." And Francis Scott Key was a slaveholder. People didn't know that. So on the floor of the legislature, I said the truth would have been told if he said, "or the land of the tree and the home of the slave." Those are the kind of little object and historical lessons I gave to people on the floor of the legislature. Has any black person ever done that before? Has any black person who was in the legislature ever been held up as the one who stopped the legislature at will? But let me continue, because we're talking about the blue dot. Ever in the minority, Chambers became highly skilled in the filibuster, employing delaying tactics such as extending debate. Quote, "He fully understands one," and I read this, but I'm reading it again. "He fully understands one individual could really slow down and hinder movement in a state like ours." How would I know that? Because I studied. I wanted to learn as much about the environment where I would be operating, the people who would be there, and the rules according which they would be governed. I mastered their rules. They didn't. They didn't have to know them like I do. They were always in the majority. I was 1 out of 48. And when I go give a speech, people say, "You mean you're the only black person in that legislature?" I said, "Yes, and they need more help." And then I add, if Alibaba can handle 40 thieves, I certainly should be able to handle 48 white people. And that's what I told them on the floor. I told them, "This is my legislature. I own this legislature. You all are my white folks. Now, if there's a bill that I think really needs to be passed, I will allow you to pass it." Who would dare say that in any legislative assembly? Being 1 out of 49, dare to say it, and yet get bills through, as has been mentioned, to mandate district elections against the opposition of the white people, district elections for the school board, the city council, and the county board, and help create the learning community who got the sales tax taken off food and other things that people take for granted. I didn't start out in advance with an agenda. It was just my view that anything that came up that was wrong and I could do something about it, that's what I was going to do. But anyway, a gifted orator, Vargas said he doesn't do it all the time, but he does do it when he believes the integrity of our state and our people might be harmed, unquote. A gifted orator, some liken to a firebrand preacher, Chambers used his time in extended debates to educate his mostly white colleagues on history, highlighting slavery and the long-standing injustices to the black community. Extremely well-read, Chambers would quote at length from the Bible, which he tongue-in-cheek called the Bible. Chambers did not just play defense. In fact, he was often on the offensive. A lifelong opponent of the death penalty, Chambers introduced a bill to repeal Nebraska's capital punishment law at the beginning of each legislative session. He introduced this bill 36 times. It passed in 1976, only to be vetoed by then Governor Charles Stone. It passed again in 2015 with enough support from the conservative senators to override the governor's veto. It was bankrolled by Pete Ricketts, who's now a member of the U.S. Senate from Nebraska. This might have been Chambers' crowning achievement, but not long after, 60% of Nebraskans voted to reinstate the death penalty. After a petition earned enough signatures to be included on the ballot for the 2016 election, Chambers was successful, however, in banning the death penalty for people under 18 at the time of their crimes and people with developmental disabilities. How many of you all knew that those categories of people would face the death penalty in Nebraska, but as a result of my bill, 2 people with developmental disabilities were immediately removed from death row? That's what this atheist, as they call me, was able to do. But this so-called atheist who says, Popeye gave me my slogan, I am what I am, no matter what people say, and I'm going to be what I am forever, in human terms, knowing that forever does have an ending. In a presidential election some have framed as a model referendum on the American soul, Chambers' clear-eyed vision of justice is a helpful thorn to keep agitating. While in office, Chambers also wrote laws that banned corporal punishment in Nebraska schools, eliminated sales tax on groceries, and held the state more accountable in a variety of ways, from requiring a grand jury investigation of people who died in the custody of law enforcement to demanding investigations into campaign finance violations and use of legislative computers for cyber sex. Chambers was such a thorn in the sides of Nebraska's conservative political leadership that they passed a term limit law to get him out of the legislature. Chambers served his term, waited 4 years, and then returned. His second term limit required break came this year at the age of 83. It could be his last. Chambers' moral conscience and gritty perseverance guided his life in and out of politics. Quote, I know I'm the most feared and hated man in this state, Chambers told the Omaha World-Herald. I know that, and it doesn't mean anything to me because my life is not based on whether people approve of what I do or agree with what I do, unquote. Regardless of Nebraska's potentially crucial role in Biden's victory, the tireless Chambers remains sober in his assessment of his state and the state of progressive politics in this country. Quote, there's a thick cloud of backwardness hanging over this entire state, Chambers told me. Quote, in my view, the only time you can say an area is progressive, not when they talk about change, but when substantive changes are made that attack the root causes of the racism that is endemic in this country, unquote. In a presidential election some have framed as a moral referendum on the American soul, Chambers' clear-eyed vision of justice is a helpful thorn to keep agitating. Still, if Biden does carry Nevada and Arizona without winning Pennsylvania or Georgia, Chambers will have every right to look at Biden's inauguration and take some credit for getting him into office. And there was another article that appeared on the same subject in the National Geographic. I don't know how much time I may have left, but I'm going to start this, and when I get the signal, then I'm going to have to just stop. Remember, this is not the kind of thing National Geographic writes about. The headline, History and Culture. This rebel lawmaker preserved Nebraska's unique electoral system. Ernie Chambers, Omaha's self-proclaimed defender of the downtrodden, has dedicated his career to unpopular progressive issues. And this was written November of 2020. On this year's electoral map, a lonely blue island stands out among a sea of red in the middle of the country, the Omaha metropolitan region. In 48 states, this would not affect the state's electoral voters, who are supposed to back the same candidate in a winner-take-all system. But since 1992, Nebraska has adopted a different method. 2 of its 5 electoral votes are distributed to the overall winner of the state's popular vote. That means whoever wins the most votes for president automatically gets 2. And the remaining 3 go to a winner in each of the state's 3 congressional districts. So this year, despite nearly 60% of the states supporting Donald Trump, one of Nebraska's electoral votes, that of the 2nd congressional district, will go to Joe Biden. Quote, when conditions are right, Nebraska becomes a state that candidates have to pay attention to, says Megan Hunt, a state legislator from Omaha. And that gives a lot of people and motivation to people in Nebraska who want to operate on the side of justice and independence and not just give away our electoral power along party lines. Halfway across the country, the same situation unfolded in reverse. An electoral vote in central and northern Maine went to President Trump, who visited there in late October, while the rest of the state went blue. Only Nebraska and Maine don't use winner take all. As I told you, these pages are thick. Republicans in Nebraska's legislature have been trying for decades to change the way its state distributes electoral votes, but standing in their way has been Ernie Chambers, the state's longest-serving and only independent legislator. In 2016, the then 79-year-old Chambers nearly single-handedly stopped a bill that would have turned the state's electorate back into a winner-take-all system. Here's why the Electoral College exists and how it could be reformed. Chambers hates labels, but he is by all accounts a progressive in a conservative state and a non-religious black man in a Senate dominated by white Christians. Over the course of his 46-year career, he has developed a reputation as a stubborn yet effective dissident, and according to a number of current and former state senators, significantly reshaped the state's legislative body. One black man reshaped it. In 1971, when Chambers first became the state senator for Nebraska's 11th Legislative District in northern Omaha, he did not swear an oath. He doesn't believe in a higher power. That's what they say. I'll tell them, well, I don't need to go into all that. Despite being the son of a minister, instead, he issued an affirmation. That meant that anybody, regardless of race, creed, color, sexual orientation, or any other thing, if that person had a situation that fell within the province of what I should do as a legislator, I would help that person, period, Chambers said. Chambers, who worked as a barber before becoming a state legislator, describes himself in his official Senate biography as the defender of the downtrodden. He protested racial inequities as a teenager and continued to do so through college, the U.S. Army, and law school. He became well known as an anti-establishment leader representing the city's young black community in their dealings with the police and local government. People say, I don't know anything about young people. believe it or not, I once was young. But going on, if people, quote, if people were having the problems with the police, the housing authorities, they'd come to me, and I'd go and confront the white person in power who was doing it, Chambers said. I didn't whisper behind my hand or when nobody was looking. If people were having problems with the police or the housing authority, they came to me, and I went directly to the source of the problem. Chambers was encouraged to run for state senate by his community. I was pretty much doing the job anyway, he says, and after he was elected in 1970, he tried to advocate for people he considered to be on the margins. One of his chief causes is the abolition of the death penalty, which he believes undermines basic human dignity. Quote, as long as I'm in the legislature, I'm going to work for the abolition of the death penalty in Nebraska, he said in 1976. Nearly 40 years later, in 2015, he succeeded and even secured the supermajority of votes needed to overcome a veto from then-Governor Pete Ricketts. His bill was repealed in a referendum a year later, and Ricketts calls himself a man of faith, and although the Catholic Church's position officially is against the death penalty, Ricketts said he's not going to follow that. He's going to see if he can't carry out an execution. And he calls himself a Christian and a Catholic. Shows what hypocrites people have in office. Chambers has a history of drafting unpopular bills for progressive causes. Since the 1980s, he has been trying to get college athletes recognized as state employees so they can be paid. That has been done now. 50 years before the Supreme Court ruled to ban employment discrimination, 50 years before the court ruled against employment discrimination based on sexual orientation, Chambers started pushing for laws to protect LGBTQ workers. He has also called for laws to address systemic racism and push for radical police reform. Only this year, in the aftermath of nationwide race-based protests, he got a bill passed in the legislature cracking down on racial profiling and requiring implicit bias training for all police officers. People don't know that, but there it is in the National Geographic, a national publication. Life is strange. Chambers seems to revel in defiance of the status quo. He's been the only black man in the state Senate for the majority of his career, and he wears jeans and a baggy sweatshirt to work every day, in contrast with his colleagues' suits and ties. He is so committed to dissidence that it creeps into his personal life. Patty Pansing Brooks, a colleague who he sometimes called his goddaughter, said they've become good friends in their 6 years working together. But Chambers often claims, even to Pansing Brooks' face, that he doesn't have any friends, meaning in that place. And I knew it. He has a good heart, she told me, but he also says he doesn't have a heart at all. The fight for the split electorate. In early 2016, Nebraska was on the verge of passing the law that would change its electoral college system to winner take all. The move was largely seen to favor Republicans in the deeply red state. Why would we want to be different from all other 48 states, asked Senator Robert Hilkeman recently, who helped to lead the effort to pass the bill that year. In an interview with the National Geographic, Hilkeman said that he would understand if every state had a system like Nebraska's, but it strikes him as wrong that his state is so different from everyone else. Quote, for me, it was more the principle of the thing, he said. Chambers opposed the bill. Chambers said, you're not going to take away that one little bit of impact that the people in this district may have on selecting a president. So he called upon a skill he had perfected over decades in the legislature, something one of his colleagues calls the Chambers treatment. He started filibustering. Hilkeman initially had enough votes, but anyway, when time came to vote, he fell one vote short because I managed to pull that one vote off. And that saved that one vote that allows Nebraska to have an electoral vote that they can give to a Democrat if they choose. There are people organizing, blue dot, save the blue dot. They don't even know where it came from. And if they knew that I was the one who saved it and created it, they'd probably stop. But it shows how they want to erase a person and his impact even while he yet lives. but that is America, the land of the tree, the home of the slave. And I say in my last few seconds, I am running as a write-in candidate. Many years ago, I won the legislative seat as a write-in candidate. So November 5th, when you go to vote for Kamala Harris, and if my running only brings out more votes for Kamala, it will not have been in vain, in my opinion. Vote for Kamala and vote for me by writing in my name and putting an X in the box next to it. You've got to write my name and check that box. So with that having been said, I'll sign off as I always do by quoting the canary who found out that the cage door was open. I'm out of here.
You've been watching The Ernie Chambers Show. If you'd like to leave suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This is an EWC Communications production.